بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم.
So let's go back to the very beginning of Revelation. From the very beginning, it had always been the intention, the divine intention, that mankind should live according to a particular system. That system includes the legal aspect. In other words, there are certain laws that Allah Ta'ala is going to make, certain foods that you may not eat, certain acts that you may not indulge in, certain obligations, things that you will have to do. It's a set of do's and don'ts. It's a whole lot of legalistic pronouncements. But it wasn't cut and dried legal stuff only. Together with that, there was the ethical angle, the moral side of it as well. There was a side in which you entered into communion with your Creator through your ibadat, through the manner in which you act with other people around you as well. It was intended to be a comprehensive prescription for the living of life on this earth here. And in this respect, Allah Ta'ala says to us, ثُمَّ جَعَلْنَاكَ عَلَى شَرِيعَةٍ مِّنَ الْأَمْرِ. Thereafter, O Muhammad, we have placed you upon a particular sharia. The sharia that we know is our law. We've placed you upon this. Now the sharia is not identified in terms of all its do's and don'ts at this particular place, because it would be unpacked. The details of it would be unpacked in so many other ayat of the Quran, in so many other ahadith. Here Allah Ta'ala is making mention of the essential philosophy in having mankind live according to a law. Because if life was intended to have been a test of the willingness of mankind to submit to the will of Allah Ta'ala, then how do you test for that submission? You command a person to do or not to do, and then see whether he's actually doing it and whether he's actually abstaining from it. That's the entire philosophy. Why have a law? Mankind, in terms of the broad philosophies, the broadest philosophies that exist amongst humanity, there's the legal kind of approach, the legalistic philosophy that says that man must be governed by a system of law. And then you have the anarchist philosophy. No system. Just leave. No government. No government means no law. Each man lives to the best of his abilities, and let everyone live. Live and let live, and nothing is imposed upon anyone. This sounds like a very attractive proposal to some. Why don't we just leave everyone alone? Let them do what they wish, and mankind will live happily ever after. Why impose? Let's just for a moment look at the nature of humanity and the history of humanity. When has it ever happened that mankind got together and everyone just lived and let lived? It is probably hardwired into us. The moment we get together as a community, what happens is probably hardwired into us that there needs to be a system of do's and don'ts. There needs to be a system of injunctive laws that says till here and no further. Because what happens is that in our minds, when we look at interacting with one another, there is automatically the exchange of rights and duties. If I buy something from you, then it's my right to receive the article which I've bought from you. It's my duty to hand over the price. And from your side, the opposite. It's your duty to hand over, and it is your right to receive the money from me. Mankind, in its interaction with one another, there's always going to be a certain amount of exchange of rights and duties. So, if every two persons are left alone to set their own rights and duties, they set their own idea, set their own extent to which there will be the exchange of rights and duties, what will happen? At some point or the other, initially it might be peer-to-peer. You are as economically strong or weak as I am, so we don't negotiate beyond our respective strengths. This is peer-to-peer. But at some point, it's going to be the rich exploiting the poor. It's going to be the powerful exploiting the weak. Therefore, divine revelation steps in, and Allah Ta'ala says, it's not what you decide between yourselves, but it's what Allah decides, because life was not intended to be that particular paradise in which you do as you wish. It is intended to be the Darul Ibtila wal Imtihan, a place where you are tested And when you are tested, imagine you write an exam and the examiner says, you said the questions and you said the answers. No, Allah sets the questions, we give the answers. Our worldview, our Weltanschauung as they call it, is governed by the idea of taklif. The idea of taklif is what? You are loaded with a certain sense of responsibility. On your shoulders the responsibility is placed and you have to acquit yourself in line with that particular law that Allah Ta'ala has already given you. The questions are not for you to set. You don't set your own question and mark your own paper as well. Allah sets the question paper, you have to write the exam. So Allah Ta'ala has given us a system. Allah Ta'ala has outlined that system. In 23 years that system was revealed. However, let's look at the format in which it was revealed. How did it come? It didn't come in the form of a 10 commandments. It didn't come all in one go as do this, do that, don't do this, don't do that, don't do that. Because law, to our understanding as Muslims, you cannot separate the legal aspect from the moral and ethical aspect. You cannot separate the one from the other. When you separate the legal from the moral, then you're going to find people are going to start taking advantage of one another again, using the bare black letter of the law without any understanding of how it fits in within the moral coexistence, ethical coexistence in society, will start just implementing that particular side of the law. No, that's not what's intended. Therefore, the law is packaged in the Quran, in the Sunnah, together with all the moral and ethical requirements that go together with it, as a package, all of them together. Many of those laws find implementation immediately, straightforward, as it is. Like Salah, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam demonstrates to us how Salah is to be made. Jibreel comes down to him, shows him the time of Salah. Jibreel leads and he follows and he teaches the entire ummah. Hajj needs to be done. He takes the ummah with him and he says, what does he say? In the case of Salah, he says, Sallu kama ra'aytumuni usalli. As I make Salah, you make Salah as well. He goes on Hajj and he says what? Khudu anni manasikakum. Learn the rituals of Hajj from me. See what I do and you do the same. Then there's Zakah. He had a complete document written by the Sahaba to teach them that this is the manner in which Zakah should be collected. And then Nikah and Talaq and inheritance and all of these things, the law comes down to us in various different forms, contained in embryonic form in the Quran and in the Sunnah, sometimes in detail as well. But much of it is left undetailed. Last night we had the Khatm of Sahih Muslim. And in one of those final concluding ahadith of Sahih Muslim, Sayyidina Umar ibn al-Khattab radiyallahu anhu says that there are certain things waditu anni sa'altu Rasulallahi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam anha. There are certain things which I wish I had asked Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam for. What are those? Al-jaddu wal-kalala wa abwab min abwab al-riba. The whole idea of inheritance, there are few ahkam that are as detailed in the Quran as inheritance. The quarters and the eighths and the sixths and the thirds, very, very detailed. But even in a field as detailed as that, there will be those particular instances which are not clearly elucidated in the text. So the issue of al-jad ma'al ikhwa, where there's a brother, or there's brothers and there's a grandfather. How should the inheritance be? The Sahaba radiyallahu anhum differed around that because it wasn't clearly set out in the Quran. And then in the same chapter of inheritance, there's the issue of the kalala. The word kalala, just the meaning of the word kalala. Sayyidina Umar radiyallahu anhu was not quite clear about it, so he says he wishes that he had asked Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, what does the word kalala mean in this particular context? And then he says the Quran is also very clear in its condemnation of usury, of riba. However, it doesn't go to consummate detail in telling us that this is riba, that is riba, this is not riba, that's not riba. It tells us, ittaqullaha wa dharu ma baqiya min al-riba. Whatever remains of riba, abstain from it. It tells you that if you're going to continue, فَأْذَنُوا بِحَرْبٍ مِّنَ اللَّهِ وَرَسُولِهِ. But then does it get into detail in each and every contractual structure and tells you this is riba and that is not? So there would be certain cases to which members of the ulama of the ummah would apply their minds. Because the textual evidence, the clarity of the Quran, the detail of the Sunnah is not there to give them the full picture. So they have to apply their minds. The idea behind this particular illustration is that much of what we have in Quran and Sunnah is detailed enough for us to be able to practice upon. But by the same token, there is much in it that requires the application of further human discretion for a clearer picture to emerge from there. So when Allah Ta'ala told Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam at the end of his life that al-yawma akmaltu lakum deenakum, I have now completed your religion. You could well be expected to ask, if it's complete, then why do we still need to have those great mujtahids, those great jurists that will still have to apply their minds to further issues? I say that's because that is the system that Allah Ta'ala intended it to be. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam gave us in the form that Allah Ta'ala wanted him to convey for 23 years, and then embryonically, in terms of the unborn fetus, it is there. It would take some of us to implement it afterwards. The intention, why did Allah Ta'ala send Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam? He sent him with this deen, huwa alladhi arsala rasulahu bil huda wa deenil haq. He sent his Rasul, his messenger, with guidance and with a true religion for one single purpose. لِيُظْهِرَهُ عَلَى الدِّينِ كُلِّهِ. In order for this deen to become dominant of all forms of religion. So I ask one simple question. So by the time that Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam passed away, was Islam dominant over all other forms of religion? Clearly not. But what was already set in motion is that a system had been set in motion that will see to it in time to come. Similarly, in terms of our law, a system had been set in motion that will in time to come see to it that the law comes to its complete fulfillment. In addition, the law can never come to its complete fulfillment in any time. Because every age, every era will bring new forms of masail that will arise. So if someone claimed in the year, let's say 400 after the hijrah, that now deen is complete, well, new masail came after that. What do you do then? And then in the year 1000 after the hijrah, again they claim that deen is now complete. And new masail came up again. And then in the year 2015, we claim the deen was complete. Then the world throws us another curveball. They say you've got, for example, you've got what? Wait, before we go there, let's go a little bit further back. You've got money in society, you've got gold and silver. That's money. And then suddenly life throws us a curveball in the form of paper money. How do you deal with paper money? And just when we got to terms with paper money, we get cryptocurrency. Bitcoin comes at us again. And all the time there are new masail coming up. Because that's the way Allah Ta'ala intended it to be. It's an ongoing system. The engine is there. But we need to apply to every situation as it arises. That was Allah Ta'ala's idea of akmaltu lakum deenakum. The ikmal of deen is the system is in place. The system is in place. Now there will be those individuals in the ummah to whom Allah Ta'ala will give understanding, to whom Allah Ta'ala will give that level of dedication, that level of sincerity, that level of understanding and knowledge that they will apply their entire lives to it. They will apply their lives. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam passes away. For the first few years of the Khilafah of Sayyidina Abu Bakr radiyallahu anhu, what happens? There's not much in terms of legislation that carries on. Because the challenge to Islam was the hurub al-ridda, the apostasy wars that are taking place. So we first needed to deal with that. We first needed to deal with that. The moment the Arabian Peninsula was stabilized, now Islam could start marching towards its destiny of لِيُظْهِرَهُ عَلَى الدِّينِ كُلِّهِ. Go out and make this deen dominant in the rest of the world. March into Rome, march into Rome, and I speak about the Roman Empire, the outlying areas, which is today the Levant, Syria, into Persia, into Egypt, and Islam is going into all these various different parts. And life is becoming more sophisticated, life is becoming more complicated. And at that moment, there was such a man at the helm of affairs, about whom Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam had said that لَقَدْ كَانَ فِي مَنْ كَانَ قَبْلَكُمْ مُحَدَّثُونَ. In the people that existed before you, in the ummah of Nabi Isa, of Nabi Musa alayhi salam, there were people who were divinely inspired, not anbiya. They were just giving divine inspiration. In other words, the ability to think correctly, the ability to solve problems correctly with divine guidance. Such people existed in the ummahs before you. فَإِيَّكُمْ فِيكُمْ فَعُمَرُ بْنُ الْخَطَّابِ. If there's any of those amongst you today, Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam says, then that is Umar ibn al-Khattab. Sayyidina Umar radiyallahu anhu was a genius. Probably in terms of legislation, Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, Amir al-Mu'mineen, Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anhu, his manzila, his status is higher than that of Sayyidina Umar. But as a faqih, as a mujtahid, Sayyidina Umar performed a much greater task for this ummah. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam had a dream. He predicted the status of Umar. He had a dream and he said, I saw myself drawing water from a well. So I continued drawing water for as long as Allah Ta'ala wished me to draw, and then I stopped and then I gave the bucket to Abu Bakr. And then he drew one or two buckets of water and he passed the bucket to Umar. And I never saw any strong man draw water like this man drew water from that well. Never did any man draw. What was that? That was Umar applying himself to solve the legislative problems of the ummah. What would happen? Issue would arise. Umar wouldn't just apply his own mind, get together the shura of the Sahaba radiallahu anhum, bring them together and consult them. Who knows something in this regard? Did Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam say anything about it? If there's anyone who knows a hadith, let him tell us about it. If not, let us apply our minds. And in this way the ummah is developing. But this is centralized fiqh. Centralized, in other words, in the capital is taking place. The shura is there around Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu. He can consult them whenever the need arises. But Islam is establishing new centers, metropolises, Basra and Kufa and Fustat in Egypt and Damascus. All these cities are becoming metropolitan cities inhabited by Muslims, and they cannot always wait for news to arrive from Medina Munawwara as to what is the answer, the solution to this problem. One of the very prominent members of the Shura of Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu was Abdullah ibn Mas'ud radiallahu anhu. And Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu did not want to let him go because he's one of his main people that he depends upon for the shura of the fuqaha. But he realizes this town of Kufa, the city of Kufa, requires a faqih. Not just any faqih, it requires a faqih who has the ability to solve problems. He has a proven ability. What is the proven ability? Two things. He has the correct character. How do you get correct character in those days? The suhbah of Muhammad Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. Having been with Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam in Makkah and in the Hijrah and in Medina Munawwara and in Badr and Uhud and all these entire battles, he says, Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, your character is good enough, you are ready. Secondly, he has the proven ability to solve problems. He used to sit with Umar in that very same majlis, so he knows his ability, and he says to him that, I don't really want to send you away, but the people of Kufa need a faqih. They need a jurist that can solve their problems, and he sends him off to Kufa. So now Kufa is not just a regional city that's waiting for answers from Medina Munawwara. They have their own local faqih that's solving their problems. And as generations would go on, fuqaha would come about in each various different center. Things would come to such a situation that each center has its own faqih, and then each center starts developing a particular flavor to its regional fiqh. A particular flavor starts developing because everyone does not think the same. This is a human thing. It's not because any particular person wants it like that. It's a very human thing. We go back to the day when Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam instructed the Sahaba and told them that لا يصلين أحدكم العصر إلا في بني قريظة. We need to get to Bani Qurayza. So no one must make salah of Asr except at Banu Qurayza. And the Sahaba went. On the way, time for Asr set in. And they differed amongst themselves. One group said, what Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam meant was literally make your salah at Banu Qurayza. Other one said, no, what he meant was figuratively get there as quickly as possible so that you arrive there by Asr time. Now we did not arrive there by Asr time, it's time now we're going to make our salah here. So they did so. One group made salah here, one group made salah over there. Now Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam arrives himself afterwards and he gets to know the situation. Some took his words literally, some took his words in the slightly more figurative sense. Who's correct and who's incorrect? He did not criticize this group, nor did he criticize the other group. Because people are bound to differ. After the battle of Badr, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is consulting the Sahaba, what should be done with the captives of Badr. And one person steps forward, Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anhu, says, Ya Rasulullah, behead all of them. And Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu says, Ya Rasulullah, take ransom for them. Two different points of view. Two different points of view, which is correct and which is incorrect. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam praises both. He says, as for you, you are like Abu Bakr, you are like Sayyidina Isa alayhi salam who said, In tu'adhibhum fa innahum ibaduk, wa in taghfir lahum fa innaka antal azizul hakim. And as for you, Umar, you are like Sayyidina Nuh alayhi salam, La tadhar ala al-ardi min al-kafirina dayyara. Do not leave one kafir alive on the earth. So instead of condemning, how can you take that wrong opinion? How can you say kill the people? How can you take ransom? Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam says, this is also based upon the understanding of the Anbiya. That is also based upon the understanding of the Anbiya. So it was natural that differences of opinion would arise. And Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam did not condemn either opinion. And if we should go ahead, looking at all the different situations when Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam acquiesced and confirmed the fact that ikhtilaf of this nature, difference of opinion of this nature will arise, and is not a matter of distorting deen. It is human. Because remember, this task was a human one, applying your human discretion to a situation. In fact, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam tells us that one of the two is right and one is wrong. It's not that both are equally right. Sometimes one is more correct than the other. Because the following day Allah Ta'ala revealed to him which was the correct view. The correct view was that of Umar. The correct view, in terms of which is correct and which is incorrect, you should have done what Umar did. But you've already taken a different decision, and there's khair in whatever the mashwara was. That decision was taken, so let it go. But when two scholars differ, two persons differ, there are times when one is as correct as the other. And then there are times when one is not 100% correct, the other one is the more correct one. So who's going to Jannah and who's going to Jannah? No one. Both are going to Jannah. Why? Because إذا اجتهد الحاكم إذا حكم الحاكم فأصاب فله أجران وإذا أخطأ فله أجر. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam takes cognizance of the fact that this ummah will need qadis as well. Judges will have to be there, because remember, we started by saying there's a system of law. And system of law needs to be implemented. Any state that implements a system of law will have to have the officers of the law. Those are the qadis, the judges that sit in court. So are judges always going to make the right decision, or are there going to be times when they get it wrong? A simple survey of humanity, no one's always right. People do make mistakes. So what happens? The one that makes a mistake, is he going to go to Jahannam? No. Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam says, when a hakim, when a qadi applies his mind with full sincerity to the best of his ability, and he gets the answer right, then he gets a double reward from Allah Ta'ala. And if he gets it wrong, then he still gets rewarded from Allah Ta'ala. Because the point is not to get it right. The point is to provide solutions for mankind. Mankind needs solutions. So in the various cities, this process of ijtihad is going on. But now there is a potential danger. The potential of danger is, the system is carrying on, mashallah. But at some point or the other, what will happen? Every Tom, Dick and Harry will claim, but I'm also the mujtahid. I can also do that. You're not an Umar. You're not Ibn Mas'ud. So people will start coming on false claimants to that position, because, it's a very, very powerful position. You clap your hands and people jump. You say it should be like this and people jump. But you don't have the necessary ability or attributes, qualities to be able to do that. So at some point or the other, a stop needs to be put to the options that are available and the extent to which you can apply for these posts here. Limited amount of posts. So how would that be done? How would that come about? Allah Ta'ala does things in two ways. Allah Ta'ala does things legislatively, by prescribing certain laws, by saying do this and don't do that. And then Allah Ta'ala does things takweenan, in terms of His creative will. In terms of His creative will, Allah Ta'ala decides this world needs a certain amount of rain. Did He pass a law to say that on this day it shall rain in this country? No. There's a system which creatively Allah Ta'ala has put in existence. You need a certain amount of carbon dioxide. You need a certain amount of oxygen for this world. Everything in existence, mashallah, such fine balance. And that was brought about by Allah Ta'ala's takween. So means which Allah Ta'ala created wherein mankind has no role. So the limitation of these positions of authority would happen in line with the takweeni will of Allah Ta'ala, the creative will of Allah Ta'ala. How did it happen? There were many mujtahids, as many mujtahids that you could throw a stick at. But it had to be limited. How did it become limited? You go back to the time of the Tabi'een, every great faqih, every great qadi was a mujtahid. And if every mujtahid had to thereafter grow himself and his students into an entire school of law, imagine how many schools of law would you have had? 20, 30, 500, there are possibilities. any number that you can guess. But Allah Ta'ala made it such that we're sitting with 4 schools of law only. Egypt was a country that had its own faqih. His name was Layth ibn Sa'd. We don't hear about the madhab of Layth ibn Sa'd today. But there was a person called Layth ibn Sa'd. He was the Imam of Egypt of his time. And his madhab died out. There was an Imam in Khurasan. His name was Ishaq ibn Rahawayh. He was a great mujtahid, great Imam of the caliber of Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal. But, sorry, let me just move this one. Sun is in my eyes. His madhab died out. It doesn't exist anymore. Sufyan Thawri was a great Imam in Kufa of his time. He had fiqh of his own. He had a proto-madhab of his own. It died out. How did Allah Ta'ala bring about takweenan? How did Allah Ta'ala bring about the survival of 4 madhahib and the demise of all the rest? In the same way as He brought about the survival of this deen. What made this deen survive up to the present day? Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam was granted such followers that were inspired by him to such an extent that they were prepared to give their lives for that deen. Live the rest of their lives to build his deen. Go to the furthest reaches of the world to go and take that deen there. And so powerful was the charismatic appeal of Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam that it did not stop with generation number 1. It went over into generation 2, which went over into generation 3, which went over into generation 4. We are probably generation 50, 60 or something. It's still continuing. The rahmah of Rahmatul lil Alameen Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam is like a ripple effect which just continues and continues and continues. And some of it was channeled into these 4 madhahib. These 4 madhahib, the founders of each of these madhahib, what made them different from the madhahib that died out? Imam Shafi'i comes to Egypt. And Imam Shafi'i is a student of Imam Malik from Medina. He has studied under him. But there were aspects of the fiqh of Imam Malik that Imam Shafi'i had a bit of a difference with. And Imam Layth also had the same differences with Imam Malik. So he felt himself more inclined towards Layth ibn Sa'd's way of thinking, not his Ustad Malik's way of thinking. He admired Layth ibn Sa'd for something, for that fiqh of his. But he lamented one point. He says, Al-Laythu afqahu min Malik. Layth is more learned than my teacher. In fiqh, Layth is more learned than my teacher Malik. When a student says about his beloved teacher that someone else is more learned than my teacher, that statement carries weight. غَيْرَ أَنَّ أَصْحَابَهُ ضَيَّعُوهُ. But Layth had students who did not continue his legacy, who failed to continue his legacy. What were the A'immah Arba? How were they different from Layth ibn Sa'd? They inspired their students to such an extent that those students carried on the legacy to those after them. That they carried on the legacy to those after them. And for 1,200, 300 years, these legacies have continued unabated. As I sit here this moment, I can recite to you a chain of transmission from myself up to Imam Shafi'i rahmatullahi alayhi that will symbolize the transmission of this fiqh. That Imam Shafi'i taught someone, who taught someone, who taught someone, who taught someone, eventually it comes down to the likes of us. Sometimes we know the chain, sometimes we don't know the chain, but this is exactly what has happened in history. That charisma of Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam was channeled into these 4 figures here. When all other madhahib fell out of use, Allah Ta'ala had so decreed in what I call a takweeni sense. Allah Ta'ala intervened in terms of His creative will, just He has created systems for this dunya, for the rain and the wind and the air and the nitrogen and the oxygen and the plants. He's created systems. He's created systems for the preservation and the continuation of ثُمَّ جَعَلْنَاكَ عَلَى شَرِيعَةٍ مِّنَ الْأَمْرِ. Allah Ta'ala said, we've created a sharia for you. We've placed you upon that sharia. Now you have to follow that sharia. وَلَا تَتَّبِعْ أَهْوَاءَ الَّذِينَ لَا يَعْلَمُونَ. Do not follow the desires of those that have no knowledge. Those that have no knowledge. Knowledge of what? People that don't know simple arithmetic, people that don't know simple history, people that have no knowledge of geography or science. No. People that have no knowledge of the existential realities of what life is all about. What is the reality of this life? The thing that answers 2 questions. Whence and whither? Where do we come from and where are we about to go to? Where do we come from? That answer can only be answered, that question can only be answered when wahi comes from Allah Ta'ala's side. Where are we headed for? Once we realize the transient nature of this particular world, in light of wahi, then we can start preparing for that future which awaits us. And how do we achieve success in that which is to come? That's the question in front of us. So any human situation that arises will need answers to that particular solution, that question. Where will we get the answers? Allah Ta'ala has created the system. Allah Ta'ala has created the system. They were great Imams. What they did was they started a certain method of legislation. They started a method of looking deeply into the Quran, looking deeply into the Sunnah, preserving that Sunnah, and thereafter mining that Quran and that Sunnah for the information as to what is the solution in a situation where you buy and sell X in exchange for Y. What is the solution in a nikah situation where something went wrong with the pronunciation of the formula of nikah? What happens in a case where a person stole something but it's under a certain value? Any human situation that can arise, ready answers are there. The answers initially are not ready. But what happens as the centuries go forward, as time flows, the answers are gathering and gathering and gathering, and more cases that were unprecedented once upon a time are now precedented. The answers are ready. So you and I need to act. Imagine the following: a little kid, 6 years old. That kid needs to learn how to make salah. This kid needs to learn how to make salah. So we can teach him maybe Allahu Akbar, and thereafter reciting of the what? Whether you recite وَجَّهْتُ وَجْهِيَ لِلْفَطْرِ السَّمَاوَاتِ, whether you recite سُبْحَانَكَ اللَّهُمَّ, whether you said اللَّهُمَّ بَعِدْ بَيْنِي وَبَيْنَ خَطَايَايَ, all of this is from the Sunnah. But imagine you're trying to get that kid, you tell him, little boy, learn, and you recite for him وَجَّهْتُ وَجْهِيَ. The moment he's learned that, they tell him, but there's an alternative narration from Ibn Mas'ud which says that you recite this other dua here, and then there's an alternative narration which says you recite this here. The little child, after a while, will probably go and play outside, never learn how to make salah properly. So what do these madhahib provide you with? Before we get to the answer, let's use a simile. Most kids these days, the smaller ones, if you ask them where does bread come from, they'll say from the shop. Anything beyond that, they might not know. For them to imagine that someone planted a seed, from that grew wheat, we harvested that wheat, separated the corn from the chaff, took that into the mills, made flour out of it, used that flour to knead bread, baked that bread, packaged it in plastic, took it to the shop, and then you come. Now he doesn't know anything of the past and he's not concerned. At the end of the day, the hungry man wants to eat. He's not interested at all in knowing how was the bread made. Whether it was made by a housewife in a kitchen or whether it was baked in an industrial sized oven, at the end of the day, he wants to eat. So at the end of the day, the person needs to know yes or no. The person needs to know valid or invalid. So all that he needs to do is go to the faqih, go to the alim, go to the mujtahid if there's a mujtahid in that particular time, or the faqih who's the jurist that stands on the shoulder of a mujtahid, whose path is clear how he arrives at that particular answer. Then you go to him and ask him and he gives you the answer. In this we see the reality of what Rasulullah said when he told us ad-deenu yusrun. Deen is very easy. Deen is easy for you as the mustafti, the person who comes to the mufti and asks for the solution. I'm sitting with situation X, what do I do? So do you tell him, there's a kitab in the library of 25 volumes, you go and look for the answer there on your own. Imagine if every person amongst us was expected to go look for the answer. Or do the following. This has happened in history. When in Spain was originally conquered by the Muslims in the time of the Umayyads. And then there was a rival Umayyad Khilafah running there for a while the Abbasids established themselves in Baghdad. And then that Umayyad Khilafah broke up and there were little kingdoms all over the show. Muluk al-Tawa'if they call them. The petty kingdoms. And then came a time, because petty kingdoms leads to political weakness, and the Christians from the north were threatening to come and push Muslims out of Spain. So, out of North Africa came a group of Muslims, the Murabitun. And they entered Spain, went to war with the Christians and pushed them back to the north, and Spain was stabilized for a while. But these Murabitun, they were Maliki in madhab. The same thing happened 100, 200 years later. Again, northern Christian Spain was threatening to push out the Muslims. This time there came a new dynasty, again out of Africa. the muwahhidun. These muwahhidun did exactly the same thing. They came in, they conquered, they pushed back the Christians to the north, stabilized Spain, but they were not Maliki. What was their madhab? They were Zahiri in madhab. The Zahiri madhab is a fifth madhab which also has died out, but a very, what shall we call them now? They look simply at the external meaning, the apparent meaning of the text, and they are very literal about the way they read things. So the ruler of the Muwahhidun made a rule, because he's now the king of that particular part of the world. He's going to appoint qadis. He's going to appoint qadis, call all the qadis together. He says, I'm going to give you now your manual of qada, your manual according to which you will judge. So everyone's sitting and waiting. Which book of fiqh will we be given? So he hands them two books. One is the Quran, and one is a copy of Sunan Abi Dawud. A book of hadith and the Quran. Off you go. Now you judge people's cases. The qadis look at one another. What shall we do now? I mean, every qadi is not a wheat farmer that can go and plant that seed all over again and go through the entire process. Every mujtahid is not able to do that. Every qadi is not able to do that. So suddenly, you found yourself in a situation which we say, reinventing the wheel. The questions that will come up have been answered 100 years ago, 300 years ago. The answer already there. But you don't have access to them because you are only given the Quran and a book of hadith and say, judge according to that. And here we are faced with a problem. The finity of texts. How many ayat in the Quran? 6,000 odd, and then it comes to an end. How many ahadith are there? A few, 100,000, whatever it might be, but at some point it's going to come to an end. How many of those ayat in the Quran address themselves directly at legal issues? Out of the 6,000, maybe they say 500. And how many of the ahadith are there that pertain directly to the ahkam? Hafiz ibn Hajar collected a book called Bulughul Maram. He's collected some 1,500 ahadith in there. Of course, that's not a final figure, but let's say a few thousand addressed to ahkam. And how many human situations are there? Is there affinity to the amount of human situation that can arise? Look at the world today. Something happens in Iceland and something else is happening in Australia. Two completely different things. There's no answer to it yet. We have to formulate an answer. And will that answer be in the Quran directly, or will it be in Sunan Abi Dawud? So the qadis initially of the muwahhidun found themselves in a quandary. How do we solve these particular problems? This is where the advantage of a codified madhab comes in. Because if you are a mujtahid of the highest level, you might be able to make ijtihad and solve the problem. But if you're a mujtahid of the highest level and you invent a solution which is exactly the same as the solution that was invented yesterday. Imagine someone comes forward today and he say, I invented something. What have you invented? I invented a fuel combustible engine. That's nothing new. That thing has been around since Henry Ford. That's quite old. You say, well, let's say someone comes along and say, I invented the internet. Everyone's going to laugh at him. It's something there. It's already there. You can't invent what already exists. Yes, you build on something, a foundation which already exists, you build something onto that. And this is true of every field of human endeavor. Every field of human endeavor. Take the field, for example, of science. Take the field of science, what happens? Newton laid down some general rules of physics. What happens afterwards? Does someone reinvent the same? No, he builds upon that. And then came the age of Niels Bohr and Rutherford, and they split the atom and they went into the atom and they gave us a set of rules that explain, or probably fail to explain, quantum physics. Inside of the atom, what happens over there. Someone comes and he sets the rules of mathematics, arithmetic, geometry. Euclid did it for us once upon a time. How much can change in the theory of Pythagoras? Can someone reinvent the theory of Pythagoras? Those things you don't change. You build upon them. You take those basic ideas and build them eventually into sending a man to the moon. But if everyone had to say, but I'm going to reinvent the theory of Pythagoras, I'm going to reinvent the Newton's third law of mechanics. You don't reinvent things like that. You build upon an existing legacy. You don't reinvent. Yes, sometimes you find those geniuses that through whom Allah Ta'ala opens up just a new vista in certain things altogether. But that is here and there. So the nature of madhahib is that they preserve what is best in the ijtihad of our great fuqaha of the past, allowing us to interact with the law of Allah Ta'ala with the greatest of ease. You have a problem, ask and your problem is solved. You need to learn how to fast, how to pray, how to go on Hajj. The ahkam are neatly packaged for you already. So madahib, unlike what people might imagine, madahib are not jails built to keep you in. Madahib are conveniences built for your advantage, for your benefit, so that you can easily carry out what Allah Ta'ala had ordered you in that ثُمَّ جَعَلْنَاكَ عَلَى شَرِيعَةٍ مِنَ الْأَمْرِ فَاتَّبِعْهَا. You have to follow that law. By following that law, you're not expected to reinvent the law. You simply ask. And when it's a very difficult problem, you ask and you give your mufti a week to find the answer. For the next week, he's going to spend 3 hours every night looking for the answer for your benefit. And at the end of the day, he'll send you a message back and say, this is the answer to your problem. Allah has made deen easy for you. But he's made that mufti responsible for the correctness of the answer. So if that mufti gave you a garbar kind of answer, he's going to answer in front of Allah Ta'ala for you. You are absolved of responsibility. If he gave you a kind of answer that twists the law of Allah Ta'ala intentionally, he knows it's wrong, you are absolved of responsibility, because Allah Ta'ala, Allah's Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam has told us what? Ad-Deen Yusrun, has made it easy for you. This is what madahib were intended to be. However, conveniences they were intended to have been. And Allah Ta'ala created the takweeni means for their survival. After so many years, 1,000 years and more, and those madahib are marching forth. The other madahib, the charismatic appeal from student to teacher did not quite survive. They died out in history. But for these, Allah Ta'ala created the means for their survival. And if they continue after so many years, it tells you exactly how resilient the system of Allah Ta'ala is in this regard, that not colonialism, not atheism, not communism, not any ism could have removed this from the face of the earth. Is there? Why is it there? Because Allah had ordained and created the means for its survival. But there are times when we misunderstand these conveniences and abuse the conveniences. Sometimes, how do we abuse these conveniences? When we start taking them as identifying marks with a sense of superiority. You know, to understand this, let's go somewhere else. Allah Ta'ala did what? He created us shu'uban wa qaba'ila. He could have made us just the one human race, but He did not. What did He create us as? He created us as black races, white races, yellow races, brown races. He created us in various different forms, shapes and sizes and colors all over the show. He could create us all of one color, one height, one shape, one everything. But He decided to create us in different shapes and sizes, colors, and temperaments for that matter as well. That was a test which was cast upon us. Are you going to use those differences to recognize one another by? Or are you going to use it to discriminate between yourselves? In the same way, He has given you a convenience, and you need to practice your deen. There's an easy way to practice your deen. You don't need to go and travel 30 days in search of the hadith of the qunut to learn how to recite your qunut. No, you simply learn it from the ustad in the maktab where you grew up. Easily. It's been documented and codified and packaged for you many, many years ago. It's easily done. But does it mean now, I belong to this particular madhab and my madhab is superior to your madhab? Because your madhab is a madhab that does this wrong and does that wrong. Here we are failing Allah Ta'ala's test. He's given us a certain convenience, but then He tests us together with it. Whenever Allah Ta'ala gives us conveniences, whenever He gives His ni'mas to us, there's a test together with it. If He gives you wealth, is it just a ni'mah and nothing else? No, it's a ni'mah and a test. What do you do with it? Have you given your zakah? Have you helped the poor? Do you hoard that particular money? Do you invest it in haram? So every ni'mah that He gives you, then He puts you to the test thereafter. He's giving you convenience. What do you do with the convenience? You say that, no, my madhab is the best madhab. All these other madhab are all wrong. No, this is the case where Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam looks at those two groups of Sahaba. They made salah on the road and they made salah at Bani Qurayza. You meet Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam on the day of Qiyamah, He's going to smile at you as He smiled at those two groups of Sahaba, because you did not use the potential for splitting apart the ummah. You did not realize that potential. You did not engage in everlasting, never-ending disputes about these issues here. We need answers, but how do we look at those particular answers when two mujtahids differ about it? The one says do it this way, the other says do it the other way. We can spend the rest of our lives disputing about them. That's not the intention. You should do what you have access to, what you have learned, and thereafter مَا اخْتَلَفْتُمْ فِيهِ مِنْ شَيْءٍ فَحُكْمُهُ إِلَى اللَّهِ. Whatever you differ about, Allah will decide about it. That's the one thing. Leave it to Allah to decide. You're not expected to know which is right and which is wrong. You're expected to practice. And those that fail the test, إِنَّ الَّذِينَ فَرَّقُوا دِينَهُمْ وَكَانُوا شِيَّعًا لَسْتَ مِنْهُمْ فِي شَيْءٍ. Those who split their deen apart into small little partisan groupings. We are the partisans of Imam Fulan. We are the partisans of Imam Fulan. You understand partisanship? You can understand it in terms of party politics today. The leader of the party, we support the leader of that particular party in right or in wrong. We support the leader of the other party. That is not how the phenomenon of madhahib is supposed to have been understood. We follow the fiqh of Imam so and so. It doesn't mean my Imam is better than your Imam. It means Alhamdulillah, I have an Imam through whom Allah Ta'ala has made it easy for me to practice my deen. And my brother follows a different Imam for whom Allah Ta'ala has made it possible for him to practice his deen. But when it comes to salah, do I then say, no, I don't make salah behind a person of that madhab? Do we say that? The moment we done that, then Allah Ta'ala says that, لَسْتَ مِنْهُمْ فِي شَيْءٍ. You Muhammad, you have nothing to do with them. You have nothing to do with them. Forget them, leave them aside. إِنَّمَا أَمْرُهُمْ إِلَى اللَّهِ. Their matter is to be decided by Allah. إِنَّمَا أَمْرُهُمْ إِلَى اللَّهِ. And then they will be rewarded in full by Allah Ta'ala, or they will be treated as they deserve to be treated by Allah Ta'ala on the day of Qiyamah. So Allah Ta'ala has given us these differences, and He's built into these differences, He's built into it potential for dispute and splitting the ummah. And then He's left it to us as a point of judging the level of maturity that this ummah has. Has this ummah realized its mission? Its mission is لِيُظْهِرَهُ عَلَى الدِّينِ كُلِّهِ. This deen is supposed to be supreme over all other deens. However, you will never be able to achieve that for as long as you are fighting petty fights amongst yourselves. And these petty fights have happened in history. We have some grievous examples in front of us of how people have gone to war with one another, how people have lost lives because of petty differences such as this. May Allah Ta'ala never bring back such an age. Well, Alhamdulillah, they were the exception to the rule. They weren't the rule. Madhahib didn't go to fight with one another all the time. No, exceptionally it happened here and there. By the incorrect leadership of some misguided leaders, it happened here and there. By and large, Alhamdulillah, it happened such that the ummah understood, or the leaders of this ummah understood, that this is what madhahib are for. And we use them, we use the solutions that we have, and our, what shall we call it now, our allegiance to a certain madhab, our being connected with a certain madhab, our growing up on the fiqh of a certain madhab. Those are the conveniences which Allah Ta'ala made possible for us. We use it in that manner, and we do not use it. We do not realize the negative potential that lies within it. Because this ummah will always be in movement. This ummah will always, it won't stand still. But there are two movements that you can have. You can have what kind? You can have linear movement, in other words, you're moving forward in a line. Or you can have lateral movement, you're just moving side to side, you're not going forward. It's like a train is going forward on its tracks, and another train got stuck and is just shaking from left to right. So that lateral movement, that linear movement, how do we know which is which? Allah Ta'ala says, La tanaza'u. Do not dispute between yourselves. You are human, and humans will come to situations where they will differ. But do not let those differences between yourselves lead to a situation where it becomes a point of everlasting dispute, where your energies, your mental energies are completely expended in, I am right and you are wrong, or this one is right and that one is wrong. Don't do that, because if that happens, فَتَفْشَلُوا, then you will fail. In going forward, you won't be able to go forward. وَتَذْهَبَ رِيحُكُمْ. And that wind that was pushing you forward, the wind that was blowing the sails of the ummah forward, that winds will go away. So how do we then treat the phenomenon of differences when they do come up? And by the way, differences do not just exist between madhahib, they exist within one madhab as well. Within one madhab you'll find two different points of view. And there are even times when one person has two different points of view. Why? Because he investigates, he comes to a certain solution, and then he investigates as well, then he realizes I was wrong yesterday, and this seems to be a more correct solution. So the entire spectrum is littered with the phenomenon of ikhtilaf, of differences. And then there are rules how we go about mitigating these circumstances. What we should never allow to happen is that they become reasons to stop the forward movement of the ummah. In the time of Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, the ummah was moving forward and the Arabian Peninsula was stabilized, as we mentioned before. In the time of Umar radiallahu anhu, the ummah moved forward so fast like never before. In the time of Sayyidina Uthman radiallahu anhu, for the entire 12 years of his Khilafah, the Ummah was spreading deep into Central Asia, reached the Atlantic Ocean on the other extreme, but then trouble was brewing in the Ummah, which led eventually to the murder of Sayyidina Uthman, because enemies had realized, and take due heed of what I say, enemies had realized that the secret of progress in this Ummah is unity. The secret of the progress of the Ummah in the light of this ayah, لا تنازعوا فتفشلوا. Do not dispute, otherwise you won't be able to go forward. The enemies had realized, and they realized, where does that unity lie? Because the entire Ummah is united between one Amir al-Mu'mineen. So what do? Kill that Amir al-Mu'mineen and throw the blame on this one and on that one. What do? This array is created between them, this unity is created, and for the next 5 years the Ummah fought one another. There was no jihad against all these other groups. There was no expansion of Islam beyond that, because Muslims were then fighting one another 5 years continuously. 3-4 great battles happened during that time, and it was not Islam reaching up to his destiny of liyudhirahu ala dini kulli. It was one group of Muslims fighting another group of Muslims. However, there is a solution to that as well. That solution comes in the form of Sayyidina Hassan ibn Ali ibn Abi Talib. Two great groups of Muslims are fighting. The answer to disputes, and this is a lesson that our ummah cannot seem to be unable to realize. I'm the head of this group and you the head of that group, so my solution to the problem is I must become the head of everyone. Your solution is you must be the head of everyone. No. The solution to the problems of the ummah when things have reached such an impasse is that the person who believes himself to be the rightful, want to take the ummah forward, take a step down and say, rather you want it? It's not about me, it's about the ummah. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "Inna ibni hadha sayyidun." This son of mine is a great leader amongst men. Not because he forced his leadership on everyone else, but because he was prepared to abdicate. He says, "It's my haqq, I'm Amir al-Mu'mineen. I receive the bay'ah from everyone. But Muawiyah, I abdicate willingly to your advantage. You go ahead and lead the ummah." Why? The ummah needs to go forward. It has destiny to fulfill. And the destiny doesn't lie in me. The destiny lies in the ummah together. So these are a few indicators of how we deal with the phenomenon of ikhtilaf. Allegiance, being associated with a particular madhab, does not mean that we have to have our opinion enforced upon everyone else. Instances like that have happened as well. We find situations where people have treated the issue of madhab, the issue of association with a particular madhab, in a negative light, in a detrimental and deleterious manner, where it becomes, a mark of distinction to belong to madhab A and a mark of ignominy to belong to madhab B. Now that is a misunderstanding of the entire phenomenon of ikhtilaf. This has been, inshallah, a presentation on what madhab is all about and how to understand the phenomenon. At the same time, the need to be associated with one of these madhahib, the need to be associated with one of these madhahib lies simply in the fact that for the common person in the street, what's his need? His need is that he has easy point of reference. He doesn't need to go and reinvent any wheels. What about the scholar? Because now I come to something which I mentioned at the beginning. What about scholars? Because now in the post-colonial era, scholars were asking themselves the questions, where did we go wrong? And some of them said that, well, this whole madhab thing, that's what we should have gotten rid of. Because madhahib do not produce solutions. Is that true or is it not true? Many scholars have spoken historically of the age of stagnation of fiqh. They say madhahib were the cause of fiqh becoming stagnant. And many great scholars have bought into this idea of the stagnancy of fiqh. I have a different point of view. Consider the following. If you are drinking water, here's a glass of water. If I drink water, I take it in sips. A little bit, and then a little bit, and then a little bit. But if someone tries to pour this entire glass down his throat at one go, he won't be able to swallow it. He's going to cause himself a bit of harm. He's going to probably mess his entire chest with water. The unlocking of human situations happens in a gradual fashion. In the time of Sahaba, issues used to come up now and then. An issue arises, fuqaha solve it. Then the next century, a few masail arise and they solve it. And the next century, 25 new issues arise and they solve it. Then the next century, 322 situations arise and they solve it. But consider a world that was an agrarian world. Agrarian world means a world whose economy is centered around agriculture. That was our Muslim world. An agrarian world. In the meantime, here in Europe, what had happened? Industrial revolution had taken place. Spinning jenny was invented and the steam engine was invented, and Gutenberg had produced the first printing press, and suddenly things were becoming mechanized and things were becoming industrialized. And so many new issues were brought in front of the collective group of scholarship at the time that they couldn't swallow them all at one go. So you couldn't answer all the questions at the same time. Just consider for a moment in two fields. Take the commercial field. In the field of commerce, how many new transactions were invented? How many new financial institutions came into existence? Our Muslim world didn't know about a stock market. They never knew about banks. They never knew about institutions that do insurance. They didn't know about this. They didn't know about an entire department of government devoted to taxing. They didn't know about an entire department of government devoted to immigration. We move from there, move into the field of, for example, medicine. The advances of medicine in the last few hundred years. If we go back to the medicine of Galen, the Greek, Jalinus, and then from there we go to Ibn Sina, and then we go to Ibn Rushd and all those others. We've come a long way since then. Come a very long way since then. We now have, what's this now? A system of medicine that has developed substantially since then, almost unrecognizable as what it was. So all new kinds of situations will arise. Back then in Nighttown, Chris Barnett transplanted a heart from one patient into another. These days, so many new technologies exist for doing these things. So many different issues are coming up all the time. Imagine the poor Mufti sitting in a Dar Lifta with how many issues? Every day 300 issues in front of him. How is he going to answer all of those? He's trying to drink all of that water at one go. Of course it's going to look like stagnancy. Of course it's going to be that he cannot deal with it immediately at the same time. But time marches on. And then comes release from colonialist masters. And now Muslims are starting to regain their traction gradually. And then what do we find as we go into the 70s and the 80s? Muslims start formulating finance according to what Sharia wants, but fit into the modern financial world. It will always remain, for the present moment, it will remain fitting a square into a circle, because the financial world into which we are trying to make our Sharia fit was not ours. It was created by someone else. They created the space there in the shape of a square. Our Sharia is a circle. When you try to fit the circle into the square, there are open areas around it. So there are going to be questions. There are going to be controversies around it. But that's the world in which we have to try to make sense. And that Sharia which Allah Ta'ala said, فَاتَّبِعْهَا وَلَا تَتَّبِعْ أَهْوَاءَ الَّذِينَ لَا يَعْلَمُونَ. We have to make it fit. Because whether we like it or not, are we or are we not commercially and economically active? We're all active in society. We are all active in society. So to what extent does our Sharia answer questions to us and make injunctions to us, sets us a whole lot of do's and don'ts? It's there all the time. And when we deal with a situation such as this, where do we get our answers from? Sometimes we get our answers directly from where? From the madhab in which we have grown up. Unfortunately, one of the sad aspects of this is that while we tend to be very conversant with the ahkam of salah, because we do it 5 times a day, and hajj, because we do it at least once a lifetime, and those who are more fortunate more than once, and Ramadan is around the corner, so we know the ahkam of fasting and injections and asthma pump and all of these things, and then zakah comes and we know the ahkam of how to give zakah on money and on stocks and on so many other different things. But when it comes to muamalat, when it comes to dealing with paper money, when it comes to companies and the shares of companies, when it comes to all these modern methods of financing and securitization, then we tend to be not so au fait with it. And often even amongst the ulama, we tend to be a step or two away from solving the immediate issues. But still Allah Ta'ala's hukum is there. فَاتَّبِعْهَا. You have to follow the Sharia, and you cannot just abdicate and do as one unfortunate person has stated, and he says, the Sharia is dead. Na'udhu billah. Sharia is dead. Sharia is a dead body being preserved by the ulama in formaldehyde. It's a dead body. We're just trying to show, retain our hegemony over people and make them act according to what we think should be. Sharia should be removed from the scene altogether. This kind of things we are hearing of some jurisdictions in the world who are trying to ban Sharia without the least understanding what Sharia is all about. Don't even know what it's all about, because the word Sharia has become a what? It's become a word with very bad publicity in the world. I remember not too long ago, I was introduced to someone, a person in the financial field, and it was said to him that this is the person in charge of the fatwa committee. And his eyes went big, because when they hear fatwa, what do they think about? That we write out, kill this one and kill that one, and that's all that fatwa is. And I told him, fatwa is sometimes a person asks me, I've got a cold, how must I make wudu? Sometimes it's a matter of I cannot make sujood on the ground, can I sit in a chair? That's what fatwa is as well. But fatwa has got a lot of bad press in recent times. Now in this field of mu'amalat, the Sharia, as we know it, is at its most understandable, at its most rational. And it has solutions for the world. The economic world in which we live. It has solutions for this economic world, which a Scottish economist has written about. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. Alistair McIntosh, and many might have seen his particular article, how he writes and he says, every civilization, every religion, every great philosopher of the past has always condemned riba. It's haram, prohibited. Christians, Hindus, Zoroastrians, Greek philosophers, Roman philosophers, all of them have always condemned it. But each of those that has condemned it eventually went on to condone it. The Christian church, the Roman Catholic church, usually is outlawed. They're not supposed to do it. And then they have found some ways of bringing it in. So everyone who has condemned it eventually failed and condoned it. Then he went on to say, however, there's one group of people that not only condemned it, but also provided the world with an alternative. That's only the Muslims. Why only the Muslims? Because we are the carriers of the message of Rahmatul lil Alameen sallallahu alayhi wasallam. If the world is time and again running into the same brick wall that we saw in 2008, the collapse of the financial world, and if rumor is to be believed, we're heading for another one very soon. Because in this world where the brightest of the products of Harvard and Princeton are taken up by Wall Street to create financial products so complex that they themselves don't understand it. They are brought there for purposes such as this, so that some make a profit of the labors of others. Then the world definitely needs a different system. And which system? That can only be our system. Only our system. Which of our system? We've got four. We've got four systems. Which of those? To the extent that is possible, a person will probably take from his madhab. But here I want to quote Maulana Ashraf Ali Thanwi rahmatullahi alayhi says, now our ulama of Deoband, they are very strict in terms of following their madhab. Hanafi madhab and very strict in that regard. But here is a glimpse into the realism of our ulama. They realize that we live in this real world where it's not always possible to have an answer just according to your own madhab. You have to go look elsewhere for an answer. Maulana Thanwi says that he went to Maulana Rashid Ahmad Gangohi. If there's anyone who was very particular about his madhab, it was Maulana Gangohi. And he says, he asked Maulana Gangohi for permission that in issues of commerce, to be able to give an answer from any of the four madhahib. Not just the madhab that he's living according to, any of the madhahib. Why do you need to get any of the other madhahib? Because within one madhab you won't find the answer that produces a solution for the economic world, because we didn't make the economic world. If this was the Dawla, the Ottoman Empire or the Umayyad Empire or the Abbasid Empire, we regulated the markets, we regulated financial systems, so it was our making and we can make the laws. But we're living in a different world. Doesn't matter whether living in a Muslim country or not a Muslim country. The financial system is pervasive everywhere. So he says he took permission from Maulana Gangohi that in masail of this nature, take from any of the four madhahib, because the need is not for me to live only according to my madhab and nothing else. The need is for me to live according to the Sharia of Allah Ta'ala. And to make it possible in that case, Allah Ta'ala has provided so many different solutions. Find yourself in difficulty here, go to somewhere else. The Shafi'i madhab, for example, let's assume, let's take the following. Person is a Shafi'i. A woman goes on Hajj on account of menstruation, she cannot perform a tawaf and a umrah. What does the Shafi'i madhab say? Say, I'm very sorry sister, you've got to go home. And come next year again. Come next year again, no solutions for you. If this was maybe many years ago and the woman was living in Jeddah, we can understand it's easy for her to come back. But we know how much goes into getting the visa, getting the flight, getting all those other things. So must a person now say, no, I'm such a strict Shafi'i that I must do it according to this particular way. No, Imam Shafi'i rahimahullah himself teaches us, إِذَا ضَاقَ الْأَمْرُ اتَّسَعَ. When things become very difficult, then the Sharia opens up. And how does the Sharia open up? Through this rahmah which Allah Ta'ala takweenan has provided us with. There are more solutions than one. Therefore, Sayyidina Umar ibn Abdul Aziz rahimahullah used to say that, لا يعجبني أن لم يختلف أصحاب محمد. If the Sahaba did not have these legal differences between themselves, I wouldn't have been happy. Them having differences allow us to have a number of different solutions when the need arises. In this manner, therefore, this is how we should interact with the phenomenon of having madhahib. There is no need for anyone to say that, okay, I free myself from a madhab, because you see, you free yourself from this particular madhab, you're not freeing yourself from a jail, you're freeing yourself from a convenience which Allah Ta'ala had provided for you. But that's only as far as the person on the ground goes. Do I have time still? I'm sorry about one thing. They say if you ask a housewife about a kitchen, she doesn't stop talking. So this is kind of the kitchen in which I live all the time. So the scholar, what about the scholar? To what extent is the scholar bound to stick to a particular madhab? You know what these madhahib have provided? These madhahib have provided clear methodologies of extracting the law from the text. Clear methodologies of formulating the law in the absence of text. So it allows us guidance as to how to go about, and it draws red lines where we should not go. So we know, and this has been tried and tested over 1,000 years. Refined to the point of precision. This is how you go about. In the modern world, in this modern world now, the 21st century, there is a call. There is a call that the entire Sharia must be thrown aside. Entire Sharia must be thrown aside, and Muslims must come with a completely different system. That 1,000 years old tested system is obsolete. We don't want that anymore. So the first thing is reject the hadith. Then leave the Quran open-ended. And then apply your own understanding. The benefit of these madhahib, what we know from there is that what they have done, all the possible acceptable ways of going into the sources of legislation in Islam have been refined by them to the point of precision, and we know exactly when do you veer off them as well. So having them codified in front of us tells us immediately that if someone goes against it, someone invents a new method, someone comes with something completely unprecedented, that is not Allah's Sharia any longer. What is it if it's not Allah's Sharia? What is it if someone says that, let the Quran say, لِلذَّكَرِ مِثْلُ حَظِّ الْأُنْثَيَيْنِ, but in this modern world we'll give the brother an equal share that the sister has in inheritance. What Sharia is it? Whose Sharia is it? If a person says that males can now marry males and females can marry females as well, and want to pass this off as our Sharia. What? That's not the Sharia. It is some sort of system, but it's not Allah's Sharia. In the Quran, it's almost an invariable phenomenon. When Allah Ta'ala speaks about the law, then He juxtaposes it immediately against something else. Let's take the ayah with which we started. ثُمَّ جَعَلْنَاكَ عَلَى شَرِيعَةٍ مِّنَ الْأَمْرِ فَاتَّبِعْهَا. We've put you on a Sharia, follow it. And it doesn't stop there. وَلَا تَتَّبِعْ أَهْوَاءَ الَّذِينَ لَا يَعْلَمُونَ. Do not follow the whims and fancies and desires, personal whims and fancies, personal predilections, personal preferences of those who have no knowledge of existential realities of life. وَأَنِحْكُمْ بَيْنَهُمْ بِمَا أَنزَلَ اللَّهُ. Allah Ta'ala tells Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, you should judge between them by what Allah has revealed. وَلَا تَتَّبِعْ أَهْوَاءَهُمْ. Do not follow their whims and fancies. So all of this newfangled approaches to fiqh, which says that forget the system of the past, it is something that is preserved in formaldehyde by the ulama, it is a dead body. Allah Ta'ala has told us about that system already. Long before the fuqaha even finalized the shape of Sharia as we know it, Allah Ta'ala told us there are two possible ways that you can go. You can go the way of the Sharia which He has put in place, and you can go the way of the hawa. You can go the way of your human fancy, your human preferences, your human desires. So Allah Ta'ala says, لا تتبع أهواءهم. Do not follow their desires. Because there will be a group of people. There will be a group of people that will always try and bring pressure upon you to change your Sharia. They did it to Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. When Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam brought this Sharia, do you think everyone was happy in Makkah? No, they came to him. وَإِن كَادُوا لَيَفْتِنُونَكَ عَنِ الَّذِي أَوْحَيْنَا إِلَيْكَ. They came so close to deceiving Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, misleading him. They tried to do it by telling him, لِتَفْتَرِيَ عَلَيْنَا غَيْرَهُ, so that you falsely ascribe something else to us. This is in Makkah. وَإِذًا, had you done that, O Muhammad, had you changed the Sharia the way they wanted it, because now Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam was what? Rahmatul lil Alameen. His concern is people must go to Jannah. So he's thinking, it might just have occurred to his mind, should I compromise with them or shouldn't I? There are certain things in which you can compromise, like Hudaybiyah. Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam compromised to a certain extent, but Allah's law is not open for compromise. Because not your law, it's Allah's law. وَأَنِحْكُمْ بَيْنَهُمْ, no, which لِتَفْتَرِ وَإِذًا لَاتَّخَذُوكَ خَلِيلًا. If you had done that, then they would have slapped you on the shoulder and said, you're a good Muslim, you're our friend. Because you have realized that Sharia is just being preserved in formaldehyde. We have to make it a 21st century friendly law. We have to make it a law that fits into the 21st century. Now Allah Ta'ala speaks, وَلَوْلَا أَن ثَبَّتْنَاكَ. Muhammad, if at that moment, when that was put in front of you, and you might just have thought that way, if Allah had not given you firmness, steadfastness, tathbeet from Allah Ta'ala's side, had Allah not given you tathbeet at that moment, what would have happened? وَلَوْلَا أَن ثَبَّتْنَاكَ لَقَدْ كِدْتَ تَرْكَنُ إِلَيْهِمْ شَيْئًا قَلِيلًا. You might just have inclined some little bit towards them because of your concern for them. You are bil mu'minina ra'ufur rahim. You're concerned for the ummah. Your concern for them, your care for them stretches so far that you might just have thought of it. What would have happened if you had done it? إِذَا لَأَذَقْنَاكَ ضِعْفَ الْحَيَاةِ وَضِعْفَ الْمَمَاتِ. Had you done so. Now this is not Allah speaking to Quraysh. This is not Allah Ta'ala speaking to Fir'aun. This is not Allah Ta'ala speaking to Mushrikeen. Allah speaking to His most beloved. As Allah Ta'ala speaking to His most beloved, He says, Muhammad, if you had done what they wanted you to do, we would have sent down upon you, despite the fact that you're so beloved to Allah, we'd have sent down upon you double the punishment of this world and double the punishment of the akhirah. ثُمَّ لَا تَجِدُ لَكَ عَلَيْنَا نَصِيرًا. You would find no one to help you against our punishment. This is how Allah speaks to His beloved. Allah speaks to His beloved and says, you've got no right to change my Sharia. This is my Sharia. This is a question paper that Allah is setting to us. Can we change it according to our own whims and fancy? If the danger of that was so severe that even Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam was so severely reprimanded, what about the rest of us? If we went that direction and said, 21st century, we need to get rid of the formaldehyde Sharia and we need to invent a new Sharia altogether. And the powers that be are starting to apply that kind of pressure. They are starting to apply that kind of pressure, change the sabbat and change that sabbat and fit into it. And then إِذَا لَاتَّخَذُوكَ خَلِيلًا. They'll say, no, you are our friend, you're a good Muslim. If Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam was so severely reprimanded, what about the rest of us? We have a duty. We have a duty to keep Allah's Sharia preserved as it was. We preserve it through the methodologies of that Takwini system which Allah Ta'ala put in place. What is that Takwini system? The madhahib of Imam Abu Hanifa, Imam Malik, Imam Shafi'i, Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal, that legacy which Allah Ta'ala had preserved for us. وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله وسلم على سيدنا محمد وآله وصحبه أجمعين.
If anyone's got any questions for me.
About this, you said before, you know the people say about Salafis. What is about it?
The question is about Salafis. What the Salafi situation is one of those responses to our modern problem. The Ummah trying to regain some traction again, and they say that the problem lies with madhahib. We shouldn't have had madhahib in the first place. So they say we free ourselves of all madhahib and we're going to start something anew. Now you see, starting something anew, in which aspect of the Sharia? Where? In the ibadat, in the muamalat, where are you going to start something anew? There's almost not a single mas'ala, single point in this thing called Salafiyat that is not already precedented. If they're making salah in a particular way, it's in that madhab, or it's in that madhab, it's already there. What was so novel about it? So had you just stuck to what there was already, you'd have been as good as where you are right now. So it hasn't brought anything anew. Tell a little story quickly. My ustad who was here in town a few days ago, Mufti Saeed Padampuri, tells a story about his ustad, Allama Ibrahim Balyawi, who was an imam in a masjid in his youth, and he had a friend who was of the Ahl Hadith. And he was Imam in the masjid not too far away from there. So they would visit one another. When they visited one another, then one day after Asr he goes and visits, he finds his Ahl Hadith friend sitting with the kitab on his lap. When Allama Baliawi comes, he quickly closes the kitab. They ask him, which kitab are you looking at? Ahl Hadith, you must be looking at some Hadith kitab or the other, Bukhari, Muslim, Abu Dawud, which one? They say, don't worry, leave it, don't ask too many questions. He said, no, I want to know. Eventually opened the kitab, it was Hidayah, Hanafi Fiqh kitab. So he said, Miyan, main to samajhta tha ki aap log Ahl Hadith ho. So he says, no, in Hidayah, awwalain we Ahl Hadith, Hidayah akhirain we can't be Ahl Hadith. Awwalain, what's the difference between the two? Awwalain are those masail of ibadat. You see, a person who used to be a Hanafi, or for example say, no, but I read in the hadith Raful Yadain. We'll tell him, man, we are Shafi, we've been doing Raful Yadain since time immemorial. You haven't come with anything new. But the test comes in the bab of muamalat. You see, in ibadat, I spoke sometime earlier about Bulughul Maram of Hafidh ibn Hajar, 1,500 hadith. Now, if I should broadly divide fiqh into 4 different areas, ibadat, and then there's muamalat, then there's family law, munakahat, and then there's, let's just call it all the rest. More than half of the ahadith in that kitab are all just about salah, zakah, sawm, hajj and tahara. Then the remaining less than that half has to cover 3/4 of fiqh. That means in those other abwab there are less ahadith. In those other abwab you have to apply your acumen, that Umar's legacy, apply your mind to those. Now that's where we separate the men from the boys. That's where we separate the men from the boys. Now to give you an idea of what happens here. In the modern era, we've spoken about contemporary Islamic finance. So you would have expected all those that said, we don't follow madhahib. The challenge is now there. How do you produce solutions for the financial world? They've had conferences since the 70s already, many conferences. And it is one of my areas of interest. So I read not just the the resolutions of the conference, but also the papers delivered in those conferences. And what are those papers? No genius of, this is my solution. What do you find in there? The Maliki madhab says, the Hanafi madhab says, the Hanbali madhab. They are still remaining dependent on this fiqh of the madhahib. They cannot get rid of it. Imagine if British legislators they have to overnight say, we're done with British law, we're starting something new. Anyone who has some kind of idea, and the whole world wherever Britain ruled has some kind of idea what British law is like. They have, yes, there is the substantive, legislation, specific acts that are promulgated from time to time. And then you have this huge safety net kind of thing called the common law. In the absence of specific law, you'll just fall back on the common law. Any legal system will understand the need for precedent. Any legal system will understand the need for precedent. Some or the other, some Muslims imagine for a little while that madhahib meant the stagnancy of fiqh, and they imagined a problem and they imagined a wrong solution to it. That is basically the phenomenon. It was a misunderstanding, but inshallah as time goes on, hopefully we make dua that Allah Ta'ala takes that particular misunderstanding away, because that has caused a lot of unnecessary friction in the ummah. It was an attempt, perhaps a praiseworthy attempt from some particular aspects. It might have been praiseworthy. The late Dr. Muhammad Saeed Ramadan Al-Bouti used to call it marhala zamaniya mubaraka. It is a temporary, transient stage through which we moved, and there's barakah in there. Because what's the barakah side of it? Yes, there's a lot of negative stuff in there as well. The barakah side is that it allows us, the entire ummah now, to go back to the roots and re-ascertain for ourselves again, are the madhahib based on solid evidence? Are they based upon solid foundations? Or are they as bad as is claimed? So only when the question gets asked will you look for the evidence. So that's marhala, zamaniya, a transient period, mubarakah. There's barakah in there. But la madhab Islami. It's not a mustaqil, it's not an independent madhab. It's a stage that we are going through. And in time, the efficiency of the madhahib will be reinstated. We're on the way to that particular outcome now. Any further questions? How much time after Maghrib? 5 minutes. So alhamdulillah, we fill the space at least. If no further questions, then we'll conclude inshallah. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. اللهم لك الحمد كما ينبغي لجلال وجهك وعظيم سلطانك سبحانك لا نحصي ثناء عليك أنت كما أثنيت على نفسك. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد صلاة تكون لك رضا وله جزاء ولحقه أداء، وأعطه الوسيلة والفضيلة والمقام المحمود الذي وعدته، وجزه عنا ما هو أهله، وجزه أفضل ما جازيت نبيا عن قومه ورسولا عن أمته. وصل على آبائه وإخوانه من الأنبياء والمرسلين وعلى آله وصحبه إنك حميد مجيد. اللهم اقسم لنا من خشيتك ما تحول به بيننا وبين معصيتك، ومن طاعتك ما تبلغنا به جنتك، ومن اليقين ما تهون به علينا مصائب الدنيا. اللهم متعنا بأسماعنا وأبصارنا وقواتنا أبدا ما أحييتنا. اللهم اجعله الوارث منا. اللهم اجعل ثأرنا على من ظلمنا، وانصرنا على من عادانا، ولا تجعل مصيبتنا في ديننا، ولا تجعل الدنيا أكبر همنا ولا مبلغ علمنا ولا غاية رغبتنا، ولا تسلط علينا بذنوبنا من لا يخافك فينا ولا يرحمنا يا مولانا يا رب العالمين. اللهم اغفر لأمة محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم. اللهم ارحم أمة محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم. اللهم تجاوز عنا وعن أمة محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم. اللهم أكرم أمة محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم. اللهم إنا نسألك من الخير كله عاجله وآجله ما علمنا منه وما لم نعلم، ونعوذ بك من الشر كله عاجله وآجله ما علمنا منه وما لم نعلم. اللهم إنا نسألك فعل الخيرات وترك المنكرات وحب المساكين، وأن تغفر لنا وترحمنا، وإذا أردت في قوم فتنة فتوفنا غير مفتونين. اللهم أرنا الحق حقا وارزقنا اتباعه، وأرنا الباطل باطلا وارزقنا اجتنابه. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. ربنا ظلمنا أنفسنا وإن لم تغفر لنا وترحمنا لنكونن من الخاسرين. ربنا هب لنا من أزواجنا وذرياتنا قرة أعين واجعلنا للمتقين إماما. ربنا أوزعنا أن نشكر نعمتك التي أنعمت علينا وعلى والدينا، وأن نعمل صالحا ترضاه، وأصلح لنا في ذريتنا إنا تبنا إليك وإنا من المسلمين. اللهم اغفر لنا واغفر لوالدينا وارحمهم كما ربونا صغارا، واغفر لموتى المسلمين الذين شهدوا لك بالوحدانية ولنبيك بالرسالة وماتوا على ذلك. ربنا تقبل منا إنك أنت السميع العليم، وتب علينا إنك أنت التواب الرحيم. اللهم اجعلنا من الذين تجري من تحتهم الأنهار في جنات النعيم، دعواهم فيها سبحانك اللهم وتحيتهم فيها سلام، وآخر دعواهم أن الحمد لله رب العالمين.